Welcome to the Becoming Superhuman podcast, where we interview extraordinary people to bring you the skills and strategies to overcome the impossible. And now, here's your host, Jonathan Levy.
Before we get started today, I just want to let you guys know that this episode is brought to you by Onnit. From their awesome fitness equipment to their ultra high quality health supplements, Onnit offers an entire range of products to help you become superhuman. Check them out at jle.vi/ONNIT and use the coupon code GETONIT for 10% off today. This episode is also brought to you by Fiverr, the world's largest marketplace for just about any outsourced or freelance service you can think of, all starting at only $5. Please support the show by visiting jle.vi/Fiverr with 2 R's today. Greetings, super friends, and welcome to this week's show. In a lot of past episodes, we've talked about how habits are probably the most important element of self-improvement and sustained personal growth. Unfortunately, a lot of the force behind habits requires near superhuman self-discipline. Fortunately, today we've managed to get the expert on self-discipline on the show to help us understand how to conquer the temptations and distractions that cause us to stray away from our goals and ambitions. My guest today is the world's leader on defining the psychology around modern-day procrastination. He speaks and consults on how to say no to the things that don't matter, and yes to the things that do. His insights have recently been featured on Fox News, CNN, The Wall Street Journal, Fast Company, Inc., Fortune, The New York Times, and his book, Take the Stairs, which is a #1 Wall Street Journal, #1 USA Today, and #2 New York Times bestseller. He's also recently published another book on procrastination and time management, which I'm sure we all want to hear more about. As an award-winning entrepreneur and business leader, he co-founded Southwestern Consulting, as well as the Center for the Study of Self-Discipline. Additionally, he hosts his own nationally syndicated weekly radio show for movers and shakers in the world of business. Guys, you have a lot to look forward to in this episode. My guest and his team have spent thousands upon thousands of hours developing theories and frameworks and methodologies, and he generously shares so many of them with us in such a short time. The episode is very theory heavy and offers a lot of very new, unique, and impactful ideas that I certainly had never considered. I'm quite confident you're going to take away a ton of applicable knowledge to use in your day-to-day lives. And so, let me introduce you to Mr. Rory Vaden. Rory, welcome to the show. Thanks so much for joining us today.
Yeah, it's my pleasure, Jonathan. Thanks for having me.
Indeed. You know, discipline and self-control and habit setting is something that's come up so many times. And so I'm really, really excited to kind of get into your work and get into some understandings of how we can build that kind of discipline and create these habits we want to create.
I like it. Yes, I like being excited about discipline. That's very good. Yes.
It is, right? It really is. And it's funny, like, I think people have this negative kind of connotation to discipline and self-control. And, you know, it's actually a very practical day-to-day thing that we all really need. It's not just for, you know, recovering alcoholics to have this self-control. So,
well, and I think, that is kind of what the whole first book, Take the Stairs, I think part of why it's been so pervasive is just people are realizing, perhaps for the first time ever, that self-discipline, #1, applies to all of us if you didn't know, but #2, it's not as hard as we think when we know how to think about it the right way. And I think, you know, all the Take the Stairs methodology is these kind of 7 key distinctions that most people don't understand about self-discipline that we learned from profiling these ultra performers. And once you understand how their brain processes choices different from everyone else, suddenly self-discipline becomes easier. And man, you want to talk about superhuman. Self-discipline is one of the fastest ways to become superhuman in all areas of your life. So
absolutely, I could not agree more. The first thing, though, that I do want to ask you before we get into, and I'm very curious about these 7 principles, but I want to ask, how does someone go about becoming the authority on self-discipline?
Well, how does someone become the authority on anything? One of the things at Southwestern Consulting that we do is, our coaches, the people who are coaches end up becoming trained to become speakers and our consultants. And so we talk a lot about this. And in general, I think the way that someone becomes an expert is I talk about the 3 R's: reading, writing, and research. Mm-hmm. And that you read a lot about it and you write a lot about it and you research and you conduct research. And then, but probably the biggest and most important that's not included in the 3 R's is that you practice it and you live it. And so, it's actually been a long time since I've talked about this, but when I first started all this, Jonathan, I guess it was about 10 years ago when I kind of started on the personal journey of that. At that time, I was 45 pounds heavier than I am right now. And I actually had over $50,000 in personal debt. Funny enough, that's actually how I met Dave Ramsey and kind of got to know those guys and became friends with all their crew. But the woman that I thought I was going to marry, we had just broken up. And this first business that I started, it wasn't like I was going bankrupt, but the business wasn't taking off. It was failing. And I woke up and I realized that all of these negative results in my life stemmed from this one habit. And I don't exactly know when this habit developed, but I know exactly what it was. It was that at some point I had reached this place where I was putting off doing things that I knew I should be doing, both personally and professionally. And these aren't things that my investors or my boss or my parents or somebody else wanted me to do. These are things that I knew I should be doing. But at some age, I just was like, you know what, I'm not going to do those things anymore. And there's a word that we use for that, putting off stuff we know we should be doing, which is, of course, procrastination. So that really became the mission that I set out to solve, the problem of procrastination in my own life. So I guess self-discipline, the media refers to me as a self-discipline strategist a lot of times, which is kind of weird and fun. It's taken on a life of its own. But self-discipline would be the answer. The problem is procrastination. And that is what we really do, is we really help people who are struggling with procrastination to kind of understand it and then beat it.
I really love that. And I love the personal story, but I also love that you're coming at this from a much more scientific approach through your work at the Center for the Study of Self-Discipline. And in fact, some of our most popular episodes have been about neuroscience and brain chemistry behind habits and behind learning. And, it's really fascinating to kind of get into the way our minds work. So I'm curious how self-discipline looks or doesn't look in the brain and what aspect neuroscience can teach us about it.
Wow. Well, that's a big question. But, there's I'm definitely not like a neuroscientist, but you kind of have these 3 parts of the human brain in general. You have like the reptilian brain, I think, that controls like all your automatic functions, your breathing and just kind of like living and seeing. And then you have sort of the mammal brain, and then you have the prefrontal cortex, which is like the human brain. Mm-hmm. That's where all of the thinking happens and all of the logic. It's kind of the piece that separates us from animals, like in how we were created. And so self-discipline really happens a lot there, because a great example is the very first of the 7 Take the Stairs strategies is called the paradox principle. And the paradox principle says that easy short-term choices lead to difficult long-term consequences. Meanwhile, difficult short-term choices lead to easy long-term consequences. So if you're kind of left to your instincts, if you will, or your mammal brain, or like just the governing impulses of your body, it is kind of the hierarchy of needs. First, it's like food, shelter, sex, all that kind of stuff that's just like driven animal instincts. But self-discipline is that part that separates us from others. And Take the Stairs, the whole thing is about how to do the things you should be doing, even when you don't feel like doing them. So it seems very contrary to take the stairs. It's like, well, why wouldn't I take the escalator? Of course, that's just a metaphor, but it is a metaphor for how ultra performers think differently. And so they have basically programmed their brain. And from a neuroscience perspective, your brain these neural pathways are established every time you make a choice. And so the first time you make a choice to do something, it's hard because you're having to think and you're having to use a lot of energy. But over time, those pathways actually become deeper and deeper in your brain. And so you can actually, it becomes easier. That's what a habit is, basically, is these well-established synapses that are kind of firing and moving you in a direction. And so ultra performers basically establish, from a neuroscience perspective, again, I'm not the genius on this in terms of from a science perspective, but we do study it a lot and I understand some of the basics. But, all a habit is kind of an established pathway. It's kind of like if you're going on a hike and you go off the trail, the first time you're walking down, you're just walking in the wild, it's a little harder. There's nowhere to walk. But over time, the path becomes more and more established. Well, self-discipline is that same way, but it's a counterintuitive choice. And what ultra performers have realized is that our animal instincts have programmed us for survival, but not for success. And that's a big difference because most of our basic needs today are taken care of. I mean, we don't have to hunt our own food, and we're not usually on any daily basis having our life in any sort of terminal danger or threat. And so we have the luxury of living in a world where we can be rechanging our programming and thinking more about the self-actualization. But that, it comes with work. It comes with tremendous effort. And so ultra performers realize, for example, that procrastination and indulgence, while they seem easy in the short term, they really are nothing more than creditors that charge us interest. So indulging in whatever want because we have such immediate accessibility to things like food and sex, from like a pornography standpoint or alcohol, these things that we don't have to work that hard for them. They're pretty available to us, that we can do those things if we allow our impulses to take over, just whatever feels good. But in the long term, that is actually what creates the more difficult life. And that is the great paradox, is inversely, the thing that seems difficult, working hard when I don't feel like it, going to the gym when I'm tired, saving money instead of spending money, those things are the things that actually create the easier life. So take the stairs is not about making life as hard as possible. In fact, it's the exact opposite. It's about making your life as easy as possible. But it is predicated upon the idea that the shortest, most guaranteed path to greatness, the shortest, most guaranteed path to wealth and amazing marriage is this path of self-discipline and doing the things we know we should do that we don't feel like doing, because those difficult short-term choices create easier long-term outcomes.
It makes total sense. I mean, it's the same kind of principle they tell you with retirement accounts. Work real hard when you're young, put a few bucks away. It's going to be, very difficult when you're a student to do it, but it's going to pay off this huge dividend of interest, and you're looking at tens of thousands of dollars years from now. So I suppose same principle.
It's the exact same principle. So, the principle is compounding interest. So that's more of a business principle than a neuroscience principle, but it's perhaps even more powerful because when you look at exponential growth, that's what happens with money. Compounding interest takes money and it makes it into more money. Well, it's kind of like there's a compounding effect of good choices. In fact, one of my pals, Darren Hardy, wrote a book called The Compound Effect, and he's the publisher of Success Magazine and also happens to be one of the most successful entrepreneurs that I know. And it's this idea that when you make good choices, they start to compound. So it's not, you don't create like linear traction in your life, you create exponential traction in your life. And interestingly enough, Jonathan, in our new book that just came out in January, it's called Procrastinate on Purpose. And, not to get us off track, we can talk about that later, but one of the things that we talk about is compounding time. And the whole book is, the subtitle is 5 Permissions to Multiply Your Time. And one of the sections in the book is on automation. And it was my favorite personal section of the book. And one of the biggest realizations that I had when I didn't even have it until I was writing, like I'm sitting typing late one night and this comes out onto the screen and I look at it and I go, whoa, that's a huge idea, was that automation is to your time exactly what compounding interest is to your money. Mm-hmm. So anytime you automate something, anytime you create a process for something today, creates more time tomorrow. And that is it's like automation takes time and makes it into more time, the same way that compounding interest takes money, it turns it into more money. Well, good choices made consistently over time, they don't create linear results, they create exponential results. So they're all kind of the same dynamic.
I absolutely love that. And I think it's amazing that that's just one of the 7 principles that have come out of your research. What are some of the other ones?
That one is sort of like the fundamental premise of the whole thing. And I think what's really even a more powerful place to start than talking about, what are the strategies, like what are the answers, if you will, is to really understand more about the problem. So in Take the Stairs, we talk about 3 different types of procrastination. So the first one is classic procrastination. That's the one that we all think of when we hear the word, which is consciously delaying what we know we should be doing. So, I come home from work at night, I have this stack of bills on the kitchen counter. As an adult, I know I should be paying the bills, but I'm tired and whatever. So instead of paying the bills, I'm going to sit on the couch and, I'm going to zone out and watch TV. Well, that's what we all think of when we hear the word, but that is not the most dangerous type of procrastination. The other 2 types are much more dangerous and much more pervasive. So the second one is what we call creative avoidance. And I love creative avoidance because it's unconscious and it's a fascinating dynamic. And what creative avoidance is filling the day with menial work or trivial work.
Yep.
It's really wild because somebody with creative avoidance, it's like we create stuff for ourselves to do so that we can do those things as a means of avoiding the things we really know we should be doing that we don't feel like doing, but yet there's this payoff that we still get to feel like we're being productive.
Yep.
So this is someone who is confusing activity with productivity, and it's a life of distraction. And distraction is this dangerously deceptive saboteur of our goals because it sneaks up on us and we don't even realize how much time has passed. And, social media is a great example of this. You're just looking at something real quick and then you click on a link and then you're watching a video and then you watch another video and then you think you should Google something. And, before you know it, it's like an hour's gone by and you're totally pulled away from whatever you're doing. So that's the second type of procrastination. And in Take the Stairs, we mentioned the third type, but it's really only there's only a couple paragraphs on it in the book. And the third type is, we call it the new procrastination, and it's priority dilution.
Oh, yeah.
So priority dilution is really fascinating. In fact, sometimes I hate to admit this, but almost all of the publicity that we got from the Take the Stairs book was about this concept of priority dilution. And really, the book wasn't about priority dilution. Take the Stairs was really more about solving creative avoidance and classic procrastination. And it's more of an inspiring kick in the butt. And so that's why we wrote the Procrastinate on Purpose. The new book is all about priority dilution. And here's the difference. Priority dilution can be conscious or unconscious, but it doesn't affect the person, like the lazy person or the person who is apathetic or just disengaged or who just doesn't care. It affects the chronic overachiever. This is the chronic overachiever's procrastination, because what happens is the way that somebody becomes successful is by doing all this stuff and moving really fast and doing things very well. Well, as their star rises, naturally, more and more things start vying for their attention. More and more people, if it's a scaling company, more and more opportunities, even if it's a healthy online business, there's just things that start to come and pull at you, and naturally your priorities start to dilute. So it has nothing to do with being lazy, but it's the same net result that at the end of the day, our most significant tasks are left unchecked because we have allowed our lives to be interrupted. So if someone struggling from creative avoidance has a life characterized as a life of distraction, somebody with priority dilution is falling victim to latest and loudest, and their life is characterized as a constant state of interruption.
That's super fascinating, and you're convincing me that I really need to spend some more time investing in my own self-discipline. One of the things that I'm wondering is this one of those situations where just the awareness and just the understanding of how much is at stake and this understanding of the kind of compound interest effect, is that enough to change my behaviors, or are there actual steps I need to take and behaviors I need to practice in order to actually change this level of discipline?
Well, I think knowing is probably half the battle. I think that's a huge part of it, because unless you're aware of the phrase and the concept of priority dilution or creative avoidance, you don't even realize you're doing it, because you're at the office, you're working long hours, you're moving really fast during the day, you're checking a lot of emails, you're in a lot of meetings, on a lot of conference calls, you're reading a lot of articles or whatever. And yet at the end of the day, your most significant tasks, the things that will really drive your business forward, are completely left unchecked. And in POP, Procrastinate on Purpose, we talk about multipliers, which is the phrase we exchange. We call them ultra performers and Take the Stairs. We now call them multipliers in POP. Multipliers have realized that the world has changed, and today success is no longer about the volume of tasks that you complete, but the significance of them. And that's the real intersection point between POP and Take the Stairs. So POP is kind of a methodology for how the most successful people in the world define what things they should do and what things they should not do. And then Take the Stairs is how to get yourself to do the things you should be doing that you don't feel like doing it. So in a weird way, POP is kind of like the prequel, not the sequel. But there's definitely some steps, although I'll tell you what Take the Stairs is not, even though the subtitle says this, and I hate this. I've never actually said this on the air before, but I hate the subtitle of Take the Stairs. It says it's 7 steps to achieve true success. And it was just a battle that I lost with my publisher. I never liked it. I love my publisher. They're amazing, and they've worked really hard, and they've been nothing but supportive of me. But they wanted steps because, it's real congruent. Take the Stairs and 7 steps.
Ah, yeah, that's true.
It sort of implies the idea that there is this sequential pattern that you go through, like the sequence of behaviors that you change. And changing your self-discipline, it's not even, here's another misconception people have. They go, oh, I have to change all my behaviors. Like, I have to stop, I have to drink less, or I have to work out at the gym more, or, whatever it is. And you actually don't start by focusing on changing your behavior. You start by changing how you think. So in order to create a permanent change in our actions, we have to first reinforce a permanent change in our thinking. Because otherwise what happens is you'll walk off that path in the woods and you'll try to be disciplined for a while, but then you're eventually just going to gravitate towards where the path of least resistance is. So you have to change how you're thinking, and then you become intentional that you're going and you're going to make this new path and you're committed to it. And if you don't make that permanent change in your thinking, then you naturally gravitate back towards bad habits. And so it really is understanding these misconceptions about how people think. So Take the Stairs is like you're getting inside the mind of an ultra performer. And when they look at a choice, and i.e., metaphorically speaking, to take the stairs or do they take the escalator? Naturally, they want to take the escalator just like you do. It's not like there's something different in their DNA or that they were just born that way. But it is the process of their thinking of how they evaluate that decision. Like their brain literally makes a different set of calculations, and they choose a path different from most people based upon a completely different set of criteria. And that path enables them to have a different life. In other words, if you think the way the most successful people in the world think, then you will naturally start doing the things that they do, and then you will have the results that they have. But if you just try to do the things, that's not a bad way to do it, but it's more based on like willpower, and you don't really know why. And so you can do that as long as you're incredibly coachable and you just go, I'm going to do all the things that wealthy people do. I'm going to do all the things that, physically fit people do. But it takes a lot. I mean, you really have to be like Daniel's son, wax on, wax off kind of thing. Like you have to have complete blind faith to it. And so most of us are just too stubborn for that. And we don't have enough willpower for that. Most of us have to really understand why, and we have to understand what the payoff is. And once you do, then the choices become much easier. And that's when your life starts to change on a permanent level.
That's an absolutely massive take-home point, Rory. So I almost want to reiterate it again for the audience, which is that you can't mimic these symptoms or these end behaviors of the most successful people. You have to mimic the thinking that draws them to it. And it's all about using the same information and considering the same factors. They're thinking 5 years ahead, not 2 days ahead. All right, at this point, I just want to take a quick second and hit pause to let you guys know that this episode is brought to you by Onnit. I first discovered Onnit through Tim Ferriss, who also swears by their stuff, and I've had the chance to try a bunch of their products, from their chewable melatonin to their Alpha Brain Balanced Nootropic and even New Mood, which helps reduce stress and improve your mood. But Onnit has much, much more to offer, from ultra high quality protein to fitness equipment and more. Please take a moment and show support for the show by visiting jle.vi/onnit and using the coupon code GETONIT to save 10%. I also want to mention that this episode is made possible entirely by Fiverr, not just because they help us cover our expenses, but also because all of our music, all of our intros and outros, and even our editing is actually done through Fiverr. We rely heavily on their endless availability of different services, all available from just $5. So please take a moment to support the show by checking out Fiverr at jle.vi/Fiverr. That's FIVERR. All right, back to the show. So Rory, let me ask you this though. The centerpiece of your book is a very straightforward diagram that you refer to as the focused funnel. You actually have it trademarked, which I totally love. Could you briefly walk us through all the different parts of the focus funnel and what that means?
Sure. Now we're transitioning into procrastinating on purpose. And again, going back to what we were just saying, how the ultra performers of the world think differently from everybody else. And they really do. And that's why one person creates exponential results in their life and becomes a billionaire in one generation, and other people never seem to get above the poverty line. It's a shift in their thinking that really makes the difference over the long term. Of course, action and doing as well. So the focus funnel is our attempt to create and to codify a picture of the mental process that a multiplier or an ultra performer uses to evaluate what tasks they should spend their time on and which ones they should not.
Awesome.
This is part of the priority dilution solution. And if you picture a funnel, at the top of the funnel, the wide part is eliminate. So all of your tasks are coming in the top: emails, voicemails, tweets to respond to, like stuff you got to do around the house. All your stuff to do is coming in the top. The first question that multipliers ask is, can I eliminate this? We can go back and talk through each of these in more detail. If they can't eliminate it, then it drops down to the middle of the funnel. And their second question is, can I automate it? Mm-hmm. If they cannot automate it, then it drops down to the bottom of the funnel. And their next question is, can I delegate it? Now, if they can't eliminate it, automate it, or delegate it, then that task drops out the bottom of the funnel. At that point, you have a task that must be done, and it must be done by you. But there is one key remaining question. And that question is, must this task be done now, or can it wait until later? If the task must be done now, then that task slides over to the left, which is in concentrate. That is the permission to protect. That's all about focus and eliminating distractions. And that's where POP kind of ends and take the stairs takes over. It's like, okay, now that's a task that must be done. And now it's all about how do you get yourself to do it, even if it's something that you don't like doing. So concentrate kind of kicks it out, and that's where the take the stairs methodology takes over. But if the task can wait until later, that is really fascinating, and it's very counterculture and something you've never heard before. And multipliers say if the task can wait until later, then it should wait until later, and it must wait until later. And so that's not eliminate, automate, or delegate, but that is procrastinate on purpose,
right,
which is where, of course, the title of the book comes from. So we call it POP for short. Now, when you intentionally decide to procrastinate on an activity, the best example of this is email. You're intentionally deciding to procrastinate on answering emails on purpose. You're not going to procrastinate on it forever, because that's not a good solution to just like, hey, I'm just not going to do this. What you're going to do, though, is you're going to pop that activity back to the top of the funnel. And basically, it's going to enter into this kind of proverbial holding pattern where it cycles through the focus funnel until one day, one of the other four strategies ultimately will get executed on it. So very often, if something can always wait until later, in other words, it never becomes urgent enough to do it, then over the long term, you develop the confidence to do what you should have done originally with that task, which is eliminate it. Mm-hmm. Or if it can't be eliminated, then over time, you will figure out a way to automate it. Or somebody will rise to the level of leadership and they'll step up and they'll do it and they'll figure it out. And you'll be amazed at people's ability to figure things out if you give them a chance to figure it out on their own. And then you effectively have delegated it. Or the last one is when it gets down to the bottom of the funnel and the question, can this wait until later? It shifts from being yes, it can to no, it can't. And then it slides over into concentrate. And that's where Take the Stairs takes over. So there's a great detail to each one of these as it relates to the emotional challenges of executing each of those strategies. But in a general kind of overall quick glance, that's how the focus funnel works.
I think it's super interesting, Rory, because my assistant and I, obviously, in producing this show, we spend a lot of time trying to access and trying to get the attention of some of the world's top performers, ultra performers, as you call them. And this funnel is something that maybe they've read your book, maybe not, but it's something that each one of them have and we encounter every day. And, either they exterminate by a lot of people don't answer. I'm not ashamed to admit, our response rate's like 50%, all the way down to, we interact with probably more secretaries and personal assistants than we actually interact with the guests themselves before the episode. And so this is something that I see not only in other top performers, but it's something that I notice in my own workflow of like procrastinating and then bringing things back into the loop until the point where I'm ready to finally explain to my assistant how to do it because it's been in my to-do list for 2 months.
Mm-hmm. That's right. Yeah, that's related to something that we call the 30X rule, which is part of the delegate conversation. But, here's the thing, Jonathan, is a funny thing. Because what I realized is that doing podcast interviews is a great example of multiplying time, which is really what we're after, right? That's what the whole subtitle, what the book is about is not about how to be a procrastinator. The book is about how to multiply time, how to manage all of the challenging dynamics of priority dilution. And in order to really understand what it means to multiply time, if we do like a quick history of time management theory, era one time management developed in the 50s and 60s, and it was kind of like in the heels of manufacturing. And that was the whole, that was the big idea of the day. And it was very one-dimensional. It was all about efficiency. And the idea was if we could do things faster, then that's better. And theoretically, we would have more margin left over in our life. Well, what we found was we could never move fast enough to get everything done, that the amount of busy work always expands to fill the amount of time that we have available. Mm-hmm. So you never really get to that state of more margin via the efficiency. So it has this, it's not that efficiency is bad, efficiency is good, all things being equal, but it has a point of diminishing returns as a productivity strategy. So then in the late 80s, a new type of thinking emerged, which I think was pretty much single-handedly ushered in by Dr. Covey, who was brilliant and amazing, and 7 Habits of Highly Effective People changed the world. 25 million copies sold. It's like, it might be like the second or third most sold book other than the Bible. And Dr. Covey introduced 2-dimensional thinking to the world. He created this diagram where the y-axis was importance and the x-axis was urgency. And now we suddenly had a way to evaluate our tasks, and we started to realize that not all tasks were created equal. And by this little scoring system, we could prioritize our time. So we went from managing our time by doing things efficiently to prioritizing our time by scoring these tasks based on this 2-dimensional model. Well, prioritizing, again, is a good thing. And prioritizing means to focus first on what matters most. But there's a huge, massive limitation to prioritizing that nobody has talked about for 25 years. And if you think about 7 Habits, and again, it's amazing. It's changed the lives of so many people. But the book was written in 1989. Yeah. Think about how much the world has changed in 25 years. 1989, there's barely cell phones. There's not really internet. There's no Google. There's no Facebook. It's like the world was totally different. So you cannot solve today's time management challenges using yesterday's time management thinking. I mean, producing the next level of results in your life always requires the next level of thinking. And so what we started to notice, both in our research, which is, at the Center for the Study of Self-Discipline, that's kind of our research-based piece, and then Southwestern Consulting, which is really our business, which we now have about 115 team members that we've grown from scratch. But what Southwestern Consulting does is one-on-one coaching. And so we work in the daily lives. We have about 800 active coaching clients right now. And so our coaches are working with people every single day, day in and day out. And so that's more of the practical application and not just the academic side. Well, we started to notice there's a new type of thinker that has emerged, which we call a multiplier. And multipliers have evolved to a standpoint where they don't make decisions just on importance and urgency, but the new calculation is what we call significance. And significance becomes the z-axis on that old diagram. It takes that two-dimensional square and makes it into a three-dimensional cube. And if importance is how much does something matter, and urgency is how soon does something matter, then significance is how long does something matter. In other words, how is this going to play out over time? And so that kind of brings us to the real premise of the whole book in one sentence. And, because like what most of us do, absent the significance calculation, we inappropriately overweight the urgency calculation. And here's how this works. And here's how it shows up in our life. Most of us use a to-do list. It's one of the most commonly used tools for productivity. And we ask ourselves, what's the most important thing I have to do today? Well, that's not how multipliers think. Because when you ask that question, you're thinking inside of the construct of one day. What's the most important thing I have to do today? And then the strategy is, how can I fit the most amount possible into one day? Because there's always more on your to-do list than you can get to. And so it's like, okay, I need to try to get as much as possible crammed in. Well, multipliers don't do that. Multipliers live in a world of significance. And people say you can't create more time. They say we all have the same amount of time, but that's wrong. That's not actually true. It is true in the construct of one day that we all have the exact same amount of time, 24 hours, 1,440 minutes, or 86,400 seconds. But when you make the significance calculation, you're not just thinking about today. You're thinking about tomorrow and the next day and the next day. This is kind of where that compounding interest thing comes back into play.
Right.
So in one sentence, here's the whole premise of the book. And if you've been sleeping, like if you've fallen asleep, wake up.
Wake up now.
You don't want to miss this part. The way that you multiply time is by giving yourself the emotional permission to spend time on things today that give you more time tomorrow. I'll say that again. You multiply time by giving yourself the emotional permission to spend time on things today that create more time tomorrow.
I love it.
Coming back to your podcast, Jonathan, the reason why you got me here, right, is considering my keynote fee, it seems kind of weird that I would come and do this for you for free.
And we do appreciate it.
So why do we do it? Well, I do it because we started to realize that podcast media is even better than traditional media.
Bingo.
So when I did Take the Stairs, we had a big fancy tour bus and we had this big publicity team and we got on Fox and Friends, and we had, whatever it was, lots of people see, but they only got to see 4 minutes. And once it was gone forever. Well, that's very different from podcast because people subscribe to a podcast and they go back and they listen to every episode. Mm-hmm. So it's a multiplication of my time because not only are you communicating to your entire audience, so rather than me having to build an audience, you're bringing your audience to me. The other thing is that as time goes on, more and more people start to hear it. So, anyways, I say all that to kind of explain what multiplying time means, but also to give you conviction. And myself, I host a weekly podcast as well, where it really is a very good use of someone's time to be a guest on a podcast because of the multiplicative nature of what this medium allows.
Absolutely. Not to mention, it's a lot of fun. I really enjoy both hosting and being a guest on podcasts. And interestingly enough, one of our recent episodes actually is basically the spoken version of an article that I wrote called The Complete Beginner's Guide to Passive Income. And it goes into a lot of these different strategies about like somehow, some way you need to deliver value and someone needs to, deliver the book or the software to the customer. But essentially exactly that. I don't use the phrase multiplying your time, but essentially pushing that off to a system and investing the time in those systems that are going to save time and automate and completely turn your income into a passive operation.
Right.
I'm right on the same page with you there. Rory, I'm quite interested in routine, habit, and automation in people's days in general, and particularly so because this is your field of expertise. So I'm wondering if you could walk us through, I know we're just about to run out of time, but can you walk us through a typical day in Rory Vaden's life and maybe have an emphasis on the routines or habits and the rationale behind them?
Well, it's kind of interesting because I do have a certain set of routines, and I consider the beginning and the end to be really the most significant. So when the alarm clock goes off, the very first thing I do is I say thank you, and I make a list. So I actually hit the snooze button, which you might not think a self-disciplined strategist would do.
Right.
I hit the snooze button intentionally, and I start thinking about all of the things that I am thankful for. So this is praying. So I will be praying and thanking God for everything that I can count as a blessing. So then the next time that the snooze button goes off, I get up, I will read the Bible first. The next thing that I read is my goals. The next thing I read is a list of my affirmations. The next thing I read is my wife's goals. I started doing that about 2 years ago, which has been incredible and so awesome.
Very cool.
So I read my wife's goals, and then I read our creed, which is our company statement of purpose at Southwestern Consulting. We read it at the start of every meeting. And so I read those things, and I do that every day. And then I do at least 15 minutes of exercise every single day. So it's usually, 90% of the time, it's either sit-ups, push-ups, or pull-ups, or a combination of, or I go swimming, and I do that first thing. So, that whole routine takes something like 40 minutes. And now when it comes to what do I do every day, I've got a lot of hats, right? So it's funny because some people know me as like, oh, he's an author. He writes books, and he's got a podcast that he hosts every week, and he writes up 3 blogs, and he writes for, these different online outlets. And that's true. And I do that. And some people just think of me as, well, he speaks at 72 or 75 events a year. And I do that. And then, at the same time, we started Southwestern Consulting from scratch. And Southwestern Consulting is really my business, and they're all tied together. So all of these things that I'm passionate about, I've been fortunate to be able to tie them together into a business. And so they all feed one another. But what I do on any given day at work changes dramatically. I would not have a routine other than Mondays. We do have a thing where we travel so much, and so many of my business partners, we have 7 senior partners at Southwestern Consulting now. And so many of my business partners, we travel all over, right? We do primarily sales coaching and sales consulting. So we're all over the place. And now we instituted a thing called No Travel Mondays. So we all try to be in the office on Mondays, and we have all of our meetings and internal communication happen on Monday. And then we go out and kind of charge the world the other 4 days. But on any given day, it almost doesn't even matter what's on my calendar. So what's on my calendar, some people love the calendar because it takes the thinking out of where they're going to do next. And to one extent, that's very productive. That's how you go from being unproductive to productive, is using a calendar and an organization system. Mm-hmm. But it's dangerous in the standpoint that you stop thinking and you just automatically do whatever is on your calendar. That is a very limiting thing that would take you from being a productive person to being a multiplier. So the way that a multiplier does it is they'll look at their calendar and they'll evaluate and say, is this the next most significant thing I can be doing? Does everything on my calendar today multiply my time? And if it does not, then they will eliminate it, automate it, delegate it, or procrastinate it on purpose and replace it with something that is. So, a lot of times people think I'm so busy, whatever. And yeah, we got some stuff going on, but more often than not, I will block off entire days at a time where I don't do anything but work on whatever the next most significant project is. I won't have a single meeting. I won't answer a single email. And
DEFCON mode.
You're just in kind of, DEFCON. But it's much more peaceful than that. It's not like a frantic, chaotic rush. It's like a focused, intensive calm. Mm-hmm. because you know you're doing the thing that only you can be doing and the thing that will multiply your time. Now, you're only able to do that by having created other systems and been able to automate and delegate along the way. So it wasn't always that way. I mean, when we first started in the business, I was working 100 hours a week, like every week, wake up at 6 a.m., go to bed at 11 p.m., work all day Saturday. But that's what, when you're an entrepreneur, you do what you have to do until you earn the right to do what you want to do.
Entrepreneurship is living a few years of your life like most people won't, so you can live the rest of your life like most people cannot.
Mm-hmm. Yes, I love it.
Awesome. Rory, I've taken far too much of your time today, and I'm very appreciative. If people want to get in touch and learn more about what you're doing, where should we link them?
I would actually say give yourself permission to go to procrastinateonpurpose.com. We put up a free 1-hour webinar on the focus funnel where you can see the whole thing. I walk you through it and check it out. And, then you can decide if you want to get the book or whatever, but you can actually see it visually. So if you go to procrastinateonpurpose.com, check out the free 1-hour webinar. And then, assuming you like it, then there's links to stay connected with me on my podcast and blog and all that stuff from there.
Awesome. Ladies and gentlemen, Rory Vaden, perhaps the most disciplined man I've ever met. It's been an absolute pleasure talking to you today, Rory. Thank you so much.
Well, Jonathan, thanks for having me. And just everyone remember, no matter who you are and who you were yesterday, for all of us, success is never owned. It's only rented. And the rent is due every day.
I love it. Well, have a great one, Rory.
Thanks, buddy.
Thanks for tuning in to the Becoming Superhuman podcast. For more great skills and strategies, or for links to any of the resources mentioned in this episode, visit www.becomingasuperhuman.com/podcast. We'll see you next time.